Just to continue, please stop by our station support page and drop a dime on us. Revolution Radio, where information never sleeps. Is your data safe? Do you have the necessary information to assist you in confidently living through?
Hello? Hey there. Stand by. It's funny, adding you caused the feed to go quiet, which is very strange. Hey, Solon.
Hey.
Stand by. Stand by. We're kind of waiting for the show to go live.
Things fixed and repaired, you can say, hey, look, this is what I had. You have it. I want it back. Is your personal data safe? Family records, addresses, phone numbers. We'll squeeze on over to freedomslips.com. Yes, that's www.freedomslips.com. Click the banner on the homepage for the EMP-proof bullet drive to get the full scoop of everything that we offer. So, folks, keep your data safe for your peace of mind. Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com. You don't need to expect us. We're already here.
This is the people's war. It is our war. We are the fighters. Fight it then. Fight it with all that is in us. And may God defend the right.
Warning, warning.
We gotta stop them! They're gonna kill us all! See how the trouble you've started? Be they the government, be they industry, be they organized labor, be they anyone, or human beings. Time when the operation of the machine becomes so odious, makes you so sick at heart that you can't take part. You can't even passively take part. And you've got to put your bodies upon the gears and upon the wheels, upon the levers, upon all the apparatus, and you've got to make it stop. And you've got to indicate to the people who run it, to the people who own it, that unless you're free, the machine will be prevented from working at all.
Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com, the #1 listener-supported talk radio station, throwing ourselves upon the gears of the machine. Revolution Radio, where information never sleeps.
You called down the thunder, well now you got it. Right, you tell them I'm coming, and hell's coming with me, you hear? Hell's coming with me!
Revolution Radio.
How healthy are your arteries? Deteriorating circulation has a number of early warning signs. High cholesterol, high blood pressure, fingers and or toes often go cold, arms and or legs often go to sleep, sharp diagonal crease in the earlobe, short walks cause cramping or pains in legs, memory is not as good as it used to be, ankles swell late in the day, chest pain after physical exercise or emotional stress. If you experience even one of these symptoms, your circulatory system is crying out for attention. Extendivite is a natural solution to help improve your overall health. Extendivite is not your average heart tonic. To order, call 1-877-928-8822 or visit heartdrop.com or find us on Amazon.
Extend your life with Extendivite.
The opinions expressed on this radio station, its programs, and its website by the hosts, guests, and call-in listeners or chatters are solely the opinions of the original source who expressed them. They do not necessarily represent the opinions of Revolution Radio and freedomslips.com, its staff, or affiliates. You're listening to Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com, 100% listener-supported radio, and now we return you to your host.
Hello, folks. You're listening to Ohio Exopolitics. I'm your host, Mark Snyder. We've got Solon and Steven on the line with me today. Guys, how are you doing?
Fantastic. How about you?
I'm not dead yet, so that's good.
Oh, man.
I'm such a smart aleck. I don't know what's going on with me. Solon, how are you?
I'm doing great. I'm hoping you're going to stay alive for a while, Mark.
At least for the rest of the show, right?
Oh, okay. Well,
you know,
I've
been following what has been happening between Alex Jones, Joe Rogan, Jack Dorsey, who's the owner of Twitter, and the corporate lawyer for Twitter. I forget her name, VJ or I can't remember her name. She's an Indian lady. I don't know if you guys have followed any of this. Is this totally something you're not familiar with at all?
I am not. No,
I'm not either.
Oh, goodness, this is good. Well, we are seeing what I think is the end of free speech in the United States. It's an astonishing thing.
Well,
Go ahead. Did someone have
well,
something? Go ahead.
I think it's happening more than just in the United States. Have you been following what the Article 13 as well as 11 and the EU?
Article 13, not at all. What's that about?
Pretty much they're making all platforms have to regulate if something is copyrighted or not. And this is causing a huge upstart with eBay and Google, and all of them are coming there and saying, you know, we can't regulate everything we put up there. We're getting millions of things being put up, you know, each week.
Right.
And yet they're making a law where, you know, they can be held liable for putting if things like that are found on their websites.
Well, it kind of reminds me of some of the laws associated with music.
Mm-hmm.
You know, BMI and some of these other companies, they come after these small little venues. Like there's a wine place, a winery that I play at, and they grow their own grapes, owned by a older couple. They're really nice, and they like my guitar music because it's relaxing, and I go over there and play. And one of these people from BMI started coming over and, you know, saying you're gonna have to pay $300 a year or something because you're having musicians over here, and we know that those musicians are playing music that we probably own. It's just like organized crime. So I don't know if that's similar to kind of what we're seeing in this situation or not. What do you think?
I think it has everything to do with greed.
Greed, yeah, greed. Very, very much so. The case that I'm talking about, I don't know if you guys have known this, but Alex Jones has been kicked off like YouTube and Twitter and about Facebook. All his employees have been kicked off. And Joe Rogan and Alex Jones are buddies, okay? So, but they had a big falling out, but they kind of, you know, mended their differences. And do you guys know who Joe Rogan is?
Mm-hmm. I do.
You do?
Well.
Okay. So the two have, it ended up that Jack Dorsey, the corporate lawyer of Twitter, and a really interesting guy who's just like a blogger on the internet, I think his name is Tim Pool, had this very, very interesting discussion because what's happening on Twitter across the board and even to Facebook and YouTube is that conservative points of view, people that are conservative, about 9, like say if 10 people are banned, 9 of them are conservatives. So what they're doing is they're basically pushing out completely the conservative point of view. And ultimately this will affect our elections in 2020, because you won't hear any conservative point of views on Facebook or on Twitter or any of these other social media. Very, very disturbing.
Slippery slope.
Oh, it's horrible. It's absolutely horrible. And they came on Joe's show, and this Tim Pool kind of ripped him a new one. He was a really good interviewer. But, yeah, what Twitter is saying is that they are not following the U.S. Constitution. They have their own point of view on what's correct and what's not correct and what should be said and what shouldn't be said. So they're not proponents of free speech at all. At least not what we would determine to be free speech, because if you're going to have free speech, then you have to listen to people, or people should be allowed to speak that you disagree with. You know, people should be able to have ideas that are not accepted by the mainstream. But it looks like we're falling into kind of a tyranny. It's really a Chinese style tyranny, and this is the way they institute the mind control, and it's astonishing, man. You guys, I'll have to send you some of these links.
Right.
And I think, Stephen, I might have sent you 1 or 2 of those.
Oh, yeah. I've watched several things through, like Jordan Peterson mentions it, too.
Oh, yeah. Well, look at what's happening with Jordan Peterson. Could you talk about that for a minute?
I don't know a ton of it offhand, but I know he's talking about, like, Canada and how some of their laws have changed, and it affects free speech.
Well, in Canada, you have to address a trans person by their preferred pronoun.
Exactly.
There's like a dozen of them. So you might have to call them, what do they say, they, or they have all these weird pronouns. I don't even know what they all are. It's not. It's a lot. It's so absurd, man. It's like you can't call, if you call them, and it's the same thing with Twitter. They will ban you off of Twitter if you address a trans person as him or her. Can you believe that?
It's ridiculous.
As far as I know, there's really only 2 sexes. I'm sorry. I don't care if you want to transition to one or another, but there's really only 2 sexes. But that's not... Oh, anyway, boy.
Oh, yeah, I've heard of people getting banned off Twitch and so many other platforms for just saying that alone, which is like, I have a hard time understanding that. I'm trying to understand it.
Oh, you mean the transgender thing, or?
Well, just that, I mean, I've only known 2 sexes, unless you had both sex, and then I guess that was, its own thing. But even in the plant world, there's only 2 sexes, and, in the animal world, and just all of a sudden we've created a new rule where, and I just don't understand it, and I'm trying to, of course.
It's propaganda. It's mind control. And it's really strange because, Billy's talked about the secret dark order, and you've heard about the New World Order, but this is the first time that I've seen it this big and this flagrant, and it's a very disturbing thing to see.
To make it criminal is ridiculous.
Yes, I mean
yeah.
And you know what else is happening? Is not only are people getting banned off Twitter, banned off YouTube, and a radio show like this could easily get banned, just from what I've said so far.
Yeah.
Just from what I've said so far. But certain banks are now closing people's bank accounts over this.
Really?
Yes.
Which banks is those? Or which?
Well, they were banks I had not heard of.
Oh, okay.
But it's also occurring with PayPal, and it's occurring with one other organization that I've forgotten the name of. So it's I've been watching a lot of that this week. I had an interesting discussion on the Meyer Information Wednesday with Rem, but we are really seeing the historical trends that the Meyer case talks about unfolding so dramatically, and it's insidious because it's going on in the background and so many people aren't aware of it. It's extremely disturbing, but it's just the way things are right now. I wish Billy was wrong. I wish, I wish that overpopulation wasn't such a big problem. I wish that we weren't going to have to go through this, but go ahead.
This attack on free speech is just churning up that burner on the problems. It's going to make it boil over.
Yeah, it's
people won't have a way to express themselves and to bring up things to make an argument or make a point. And if you can't discuss something, well, then what's the purpose of communication? I've never been in a meeting where everybody agreed on something. Someone's always going to be offended or not like what's being presented, but
Sure.
You have to hear it, make an informed decision.
Right. It's wow. I never thought we'd be this to this point so quickly. We talked about the fires and how the Meyer prophecies have talked about the fires. We've talked about the hurricanes and how the Meyer prophecies have talked about the hurricanes. We've talked about the coming civil war in the United States. And boy, it's coming a whole lot quicker than what I thought it was ever possible. And let me read this one little section here. And maybe we can talk about it a little bit. It says, the people will be completely powerless against all this. And what it was previously describing is these historical trends. The people will be completely powerless against all this, and they will live through 888 days of hell on earth, suffering hunger and plagues, which will claim even more lives than the war itself. Have you guys heard of typhus, the disease?
I've heard of is it typhoid or typhus?
I think it's typhus. Typhus comes from rats, and there are so many homeless people in Los Angeles right now that they're having outbreaks of typhus. And go ahead. So long were you?
I've actually heard of other diseases than that they're having outbreaks from. I think hepatitis is one of them because there was a lot of poop in the streets.
Yes, exactly.
Now that's actually a job now in California where they're hiring people just to go, spray down the streets.
My goodness. There's also a huge rodent problem with the rats, and I think typhus is a flea-borne disease. So, and it's just depressing as hell that we've come to this point. Tuberculosis is also spreading among the homeless population. Now, can you imagine wanting to bring in more people? The far left, what do they chant? No borders, no walls, no USA at all. How can are they thinking at all? Are they mind controlled?
Well, I've thought about this, and I honestly think that I don't even know if there is a lot of thinking, more so than it's just hatred for the other side to the point where they're just going against them for that sheer reason. Yeah,
I agree. It's completely irrational. Have you listened to this Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez at all?
I have not.
That sounds like a composer.
I want to hang out with you guys because You guys are comfortably numb, or I don't know, that's not the right word, but I think it's better to be away from this stuff sometimes.
Well, I would say that I have thought about it a lot sometimes, and you do get depressed. And I think when you do think about it enough and you try to understand certain ways that you can become what I call Shakir within myself, you try to see the system as falling apart and how you can, provide for yourself when this takes place. And I think when I do that, I get more and more, I become calm within myself, because it's like, all right, if that happens, I'll have this. And, you just try to see the future from where we are right now,
One thing maybe that it'll do is that as this insanity progresses, people that are rational and capable will be in a huge demand, I would think, and maybe it could be a blessing from that perspective.
I don't know, Mark, but I don't want to put my head in the sand by any means, but I just find in my off time, I'm either trying to work on my own life, to make my life better, and I don't, shy away from hearing about these things. I just don't spend a lot of my time digging into the negative stuff. I just say, well, what can I do to improve my life and work on those things? And I tend not to worry about the other stuff that I can't change. So
I think that's a good thing to do. And I think when things are most difficult in my life, I just have to do that.
Yep.
But
gotta get balance.
There's a part of me that wants to try to make sense out of the big picture.
I translated a contact note that talked about someone who was doing research on the death symbol, which is falsely known as the peace symbol.
Mm-hmm.
And in there, they said that this guy did this intense research that it actually had a negative effect on him.
I believe it. I believe it. Totally believe it. Did he get depressed or?
I don't know if they went into too much information about it, because I think they named the guy actually in there, and so I don't think they revealed too much information, but they talked about it having a negative consequence on him.
Is that what you wanted to talk about, Solon, or did you have something else, or did you have nothing specific?
Currently, I'm really into what Billy talks about with indifference, and I think it kind of relates to what we're saying.
Totally relates to what we're saying. Now, where are you studying this? In the Goblet of Truth?
Well, actually, I read, I guess who really brought it to the forefront for me was Figu Australia's newsletter that came out, that I actually have in front of me. And she translates it, what Billy calls it. I guess you've also talked about it, right?
Indifference?
Yeah.
I've talked about indifference in terms of the Goblet of Truth talks about. It says in the third millennium, the people of the earth will become indolent, obtuse, indifferent, and it says something else about, I can't remember exactly what it says. But go ahead. Yeah, indifference is very, very interesting.
Yeah, so this is by Vivian Walker. Hopefully I said her name right. She's from Figu Australia Land Group. And she kind of quotes Billy here, and she says, I call indifference an evil, negative, and bad characteristics of those human beings who simply consciously and thoughtlessly and without feelings for others accept happenings and events without evaluating it by one iota or being interested in it. Consequently, they are also absolutely incapable of forming a moral judgment about it.
Wow. So people are completely indifferent. They don't care. They don't pay. Oh, wow.
Really?
Gosh.
Yes. She gives a really great detail about, this taking place in her life, where a goat was actually, she was supposed to take care of a goat and for her neighbor, and the goat, I think it got up to 102 degrees Fahrenheit, which is close to 40 Celsius there.
Right.
And she felt really bad because this thing was just getting beat on by the sun.
Sure.
And I don't know if I had enough water. So what they did is they went out there and they cut this leash that it was on, and they moved it to another fence that had a tree under it, and it said that it went underneath the tree and it just stayed there the whole time.
Wow.
And the neighbor came back, and they were upset that they cut this, this leash, this chain. And she said, she could have just not said anything and let the relationship with her neighbor deteriorate, or she could print out some information and go to her neighbor and not just send it over an email, she said, which a lot of people just will send something, but went over there and talked to her neighbor face to face and tried to, maybe understand where one another was coming from and use evidence.
I remember this has been 14, 15 years ago or so. I wasn't even living in this house, but I was in this area. And at that time, I think I had 2 dogs of my own at that time, but it was like a cold spring night, like maybe 40 degrees, and it was raining. And I kept hearing a dog bark, a dog bark, a dog bark, and it was real close. And I'm like, wait a minute, that dog's got to be outside, and it's barking like crazy. And so I went out into the woods with a flashlight, and I looked around. I didn't expect to see the dog in the woods. I found the dog in the woods, and he was, they had taken like a thing that you put fish on, and they had tied that around the tree and tied the dog to the tree that way. So I got him loose, and I brought him in the house and dried him off and had a spare cage. And the next day, there was a group of kids that kind of came outside in front of the house because they went the next day to look see if their dog was there. And I went out and talked to them, and I said, you can't just tie a dog to a tree and leave it there overnight. Oh, we were going to come back for him in the morning. I said, you just can't do that. I mean, he could die of hypothermia out there in that rain and as cold as it was. And I asked him, I said, well, do your parents know you have this dog? And then they weren't answering me. And so I didn't really say much more. And I said, well, I'm going to take care of the dog. He's going to be fine. Don't worry about it. And then they got all upset. You got our dog. You've got our dog. Well, yeah, I got your dog. Period. So what I did is I got the dog, and we ended up, my wife had a couple friends, or she had a friend that had a family and kids, and they wanted a dog. So they ended up taking the dog. And they lived kind of like on almost like a farm. So he was their dog for 13 or 14 years. And I think about 2 or 3 years ago, I heard that he finally died. But he lived out a good life. And people are indifferent. And they do things like those poor kids. They're just kids. And like kids, I can forgive a little bit more. But people do stuff like that too, don't they? I mean, it's unforgivable in a way. It's so stupid. Like the goat story you just told.
Yeah, but ultimately we are human beings, and we are going to make mistakes at any age. So,
sure, that's very true.
I think it's important that we do talk, and this is exactly what's going on with this political, statement. You have, I look at both sides, and they both have really great points, and then they have some things that are just crazy. It's like they didn't think, and I feel like if they took the good out of both of them and brought it together,
yep,
you would probably unite this country.
Yep.
But they're not doing that. They're wanting to separate themselves.
Right. Ocasio-Cortez, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, she's the leader, by the way, of the Democratic Party now. She's where the real power is, and she could be running in 2020. So you'll hear about her soon. But she has her basic ideas at a real simplistic level are good. Like one of the things she wants is people to convert over to electric vehicles. Now where it's bad is she wants it to be mandated, where every single person in the United States has have to has an electric vehicle within this 10-year period. So then it becomes a tyranny, you see what I'm saying? And she also says, well, we're going to ban all air travel. Now, these things sound absurd to us, don't they? Now, I know how bad it is with us burning 99 million barrels of oil every day. But, so, and that's what I'm trying to give you kind of a little bit of an overview. You know what I'm saying? We have the far left, which is probably going to be backing this whole plan. Also, all buildings, every building in the United States, they want to convert over to what they call a green building, whatever that means. I don't know. But you guys haven't heard any of this, right?
Oh, yeah. I've heard some of it, yeah.
Okay. Indifference.
All news to me. I am aware that there are a lot of Republicans running for office this term, and I'm actually quite surprised at some of the names. So this is going to be an extremely interesting election.
It's going to be bizarre. But the whole idea of indifference, what about the cell phones? Have you ever seen such indifference before? You know, you go into a elevator and there's 4 people on their cell phones. I'm the only one there, not on a cell phone.
Wait, you?
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah, typically.
I've been in that situation.
You know what I mean? It's like they don't interact with anyone else, but they look through this cell phone. And it's really interesting working for a tech company, because even with the people that are in our office, and most of us, a lot of us are distributed, work from home, or in different states and all over the place. But even when we're in the office, we meet on the web. Using a tool called Slack. So, isn't that interesting? You know,
Foreign to me. I'm not in a situation like that.
Yeah. So I guess I'm right in the forefront of it all. But I think this indifference thing is huge. Huge. It's a whole change in point of view. Did Billy say anything else about it?
She did quote something else. Let's see if I can find it. She quoted some stuff from the Goblet about it. Here's another thing from a contact note. It's pretty short if you want to read it. The indifference that is shown by the Earthling these days, however, is very dangerous. And if all of us who know about this danger keep our mouth shut, then we give the reins to the indifferent ones and let them do what they like.
So how do you interpret that? What do you think that means?
Well, so I think the biggest problem we have, since I've grown up, is that a lot of us don't understand what is bad behavior. And
that's so true.
Since we're sitting here having a discussion about it, I think we're learning from one another about, ways that you're going about it, ways I'm going about it. And I find that if we don't say anything at all, then somebody might not think that this behavior is wrong.
Okay.
And sometimes it's good just to speak up and say, even if it's something as simple as that's wrong.
Mm-hmm.
It stimulates a thought process in that person's mind that something's not right. And if they want to pursue more information, then you can, but something has to be said. We can't just allow this to keep going.
Now, you mean we cannot continue to allow the indifference?
Correct. Yes. But not only that, but we must say something. If for instance, when you said something about the dog situation, it was perfect. You went over there, you let them know that was wrong.
Mm-hmm.
And that they learned from the situation.
Mm-hmm.
But if not, and you just allowed it to take place, then the dog would suffer. And these human beings, these children, their childs, might never see that what they did was wrong.
I know. That's the thing that is becoming more and more obvious to me. I don't know if where you guys drive, there's you probably see it because you're in North Carolina so long, but you probably see it too in Michigan, Stephen. A lot of roadkill.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, we become so indifferent. Dead deer, a lot of dead raccoons. It just happens again and again, and occasionally you'll see like a dead cat or something like that.
I actually have a story about this.
Okay.
So Frosty Woodridge actually made me aware that we were having this extinction and all these roadkills, and so I decided one time when I was driving, there was some vultures that were like attacking this thing on the road, and I was like, well, I'll get a shovel and I throw it off the road so no one will hit the vultures. Well, I did this, and a cop came up to me when me walking back to my house, asking me what I was doing with a shovel.
Really?
And and he was breaking the law, mind you, because he was on a four-wheeler, on the road, which he was not supposed to be at all, which was kind of like another thing. And I was like, how was he able to do this? And was like questioned me, and I almost felt like I had done something wrong by trying to
So he was saying you were breaking the law by having a shovel and walking on the side of the road, or
now he approached me as though I was up to no good.
Oh,
so he didn't say I was breaking the law.
Okay.
The only reason I bring this up is because I was instantly accused of, or what felt like I was instantly accused of doing something. And in reality, I was just moving, the roadkill. But I guess, when you see a 25-year-old person with a shovel walking up and down the road, I guess apparently that's a bad sign. I don't know.
Right.
I understand it.
So what was it? Was it a dead deer? Was it a dead possum? What was it? It's hard to tell.
I can't remember. I think it was a raccoon, to be honest with you.
Yeah, it probably was. Many of those. So we just drive on past. We never, and people the same thing. They don't help animals. And there's a balance there, certainly. Let me read this in Contact 229 about indifference. It says, when the new prophet appears, 1,937 years after the birth of the prophet Emmanuel, the time will begin when children will be abused and sold for fornication. For many who are degenerated in the worst form of inhumanity will find pleasure in their young skin. Many children will be driven into whoring, or will be strangled after being indecently abused, or killed by poison or weapons. But there will also be very many homeless children who are living on the streets, where they fall into the hands of dealers who kill and gut them like animals for the sake of their viscera. Other children will become targets for the authorities, murderous henchmen, and others will be treated like submissive animals. The human being will become rough and violent, and in his indifference towards the weak, he will also forget the untouchable nature and weakness of children, and will exploit them through work and violate them by fornication. This is where I feel like we're heading. I'm really...
We've been there for years, though, Mark.
Yeah, I thought we were there.
No. I mean, this is coming to a level now. I'll give you a perfect example. And this was said in a public meeting by a person in the Democratic Party. They were talking about making it legal for a woman who gives birth to a child to decide after that child was born if they would just kill that child. So it's more than just an abortion. It's killing the child after it's born. Have you ever heard of that before?
No.
And you know what they're doing now at these abortion clinics is they're selling and this is just what Billy's saying here. They will be, for their viscera, they're selling their hearts, they're selling their kidneys, they're selling their brains, that's what they're doing now. So each one of these abortions is worth hundreds of thousands of dollars on the. I don't even know if it's a black market anymore.
Wait, what are they selling?
The body parts.
The body parts of aborted
Of the children.
children.
You think of the Industrial Revolution brought on, child labor too. I mean, for
That's
a lot of
true.
sweatshops.
That's very true.
Well, I want to tell a story that was told to me from the EU. So there was, I guess, here in America, we also have the unemployment where we can go there and we try to get jobs and whatnot.
Mm-hmm.
And this is also something the EU has. And there was this woman who was trying to get a job, and one of the jobs that was given to her was to be in the adult entertainment business.
Oh boy!
And she was like, "I'm not doing that." And because she refused the job, they quit paying her, which we also have with the unemployment.
Do you know what state this was in?
I do not.
Okay,
I
that's
just know
very
it's part of the
interesting.
EU.
Because it's part of the EU. I'm sorry.
It's not part of the United States.
Okay. Wow. So it could have been in a country where that was perfectly legal, right?
Well, that is legal in certain parts of EU. They call them the red light district.
Mm-hmm. Wow.
I think the state was deplorable state.
Crazy.
That's the state we're coming into, the deplorable state.
Exactly.
Totally deplorable. Oh my goodness. Yeah, so what's happening now is the tech giants we're being attacked through corporations, through Google, through YouTube, through Twitter, and that's where they're going to take away the right to free speech, and that's where it's all going to come through. It's the corporations now, I guess, are in charge. It'll be very interesting to see how all of this manifests itself over time. It makes me wonder where humanity is going. Would you agree with that?
Off the rails.
Like a crazy train? Wasn't that a song?
I grew up in the time when technology was coming about, and I grew up with it. And I feel like, we're going through an experiment that we were not ready for. We don't know where this is going to lead.
Oh, I agree.
I don't know about you, Mark. Sometimes when I see comments on different videos, that we post, people tend to worry about where to live, what to do, this time that's coming upon us. There's a lot of fear.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think that's healthy either, to live in fear. I mean, it's like, well, what are the steps you can do to lead a healthy, balanced life? I mean, I think those are the things you should focus on.
Mm-hmm.
Not where you're going to live, because for a lot of people, you're stuck where you're stuck. It is what it is.
Mm.
You know what I'm saying? You're not going to up and move to somewhere else and take your problems with you. I mean, they're going to follow you.
It's so funny because what I've learned from the Might of Thoughts is so helpful, and it helps me so much to do that. But I think sometimes, and it almost sneaks up on us, like we're feeling good, you're real busy, you're doing this, you're doing that, and sometimes you don't take as much time as you should. Like I have that whole thing that I recite about I'm confident, I'm optimistic, I strengthen my thoughts, I clarify my thoughts, I'm the master of my own destiny, the forger of my own fortune, the creator of my own good luck, all those things. But it's very easy to get caught up in this situation that we're currently in, and I think it's not like he hasn't told us that this was going to be. Let me read this. This is an article. It's entitled "Where Are You Going, Humanity?" It says, "Further to name with humans is the blatant climbing indifference in regard to one's own and a stranger's lives, as well as the constantly increasing coldness of feelings and the disappearance of interest in regard to good interpersonal relationships. That's the part that I saw in the Goblet of Truth, Solon. Have you read that? Where that there would be this falling away of our interpersonal relationships?
Was this in the beginning?
It's interspersed. I'd have to go search for it.
As I remember reading something like that in the beginning of the Goblet of Truth.
It could be. But
I do know in The Way to Live it talks about the duty to oneself.
And even your duty to yourself also involves being benevolent, correct?
I don't understand what you mean by that.
Well, when we think of duty to self, what I think of, okay, is taking care of yourself, like showering and brushing your teeth and putting on nice clothes so you don't look raggedy. And even if he even says, even if you're alone in your own home, not to let yourself appear raggedy and not to be dirty. And it's just all a part of fulfilling your duty to yourself. But also, he said, being kind and benevolent towards others and things like that is also part of your duty to yourself. I don't know if you remember that or not.
Well, actually, that was actually touched on also in this this letter. I think it was the beginning of it where it talks about how a lot of us have never had this warmth, love inside of us.
Say that again. Did you say warped love?
Warmth, like this feeling of, oh man, I really am unprepared to explain this because it's such a new concept of the upbringing of the human being.
Go ahead, give it a shot. Give it a shot.
I'll read this last little bit right here.
Where's it at?
This is actually written by Bill. I think it came from the Bean Portal actually, and it's labeled "The human being needs inner warmth."
Oh, okay. Inner warmth.
Yeah, maybe.
Okay.
Yes, inner warmth, okay, so here, I'll read this. It goes exactly with what you just said. For the human being, inner warmth therefore means a loving attention shown to him or her, which is already of necessary for him or her at the earliest childhood and youth, as well as in maturity. This inner warmth is a fundamentally prerequisite for the human being to be able to correctly develop in consciousness, in the psyche, as well as in thoughts and feelings.
Really, that's really great. I love that. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's outstanding.
Focus on that could be a priority right there.
Yeah, and I think this goes along with what you're saying. Like for instance, if you do think you smell bad, you're going to be like, man, I stink. And you're already going to have these bad thoughts towards yourself.
Exactly.
Which is extreme. It's a big deal because you're like putting yourself down.
Yeah, you should be. It also says in terms of duty to yourself, you should be your own best friend.
Oh, yeah.
And never ridicule yourself. Never think lowly of yourself.
And I literally I needed this like probably an hour ago.
Did you? Well,
yeah.
Here's a little section I think is pretty good. It says, whoever you are, human being, who reads these lines, always care for the best health of your body and your psyche. Always do not thereby disregard the health of your consciousness, whereby you must constantly be concerned. However, that you do not mollycoddle your consciousness or psyche or body. And I think mollycoddle there means be overprotective. Whoever constantly challenges his body and his or her psyche and his or her consciousness does good thereby and promotes the fulfillment of his duty to his or herself, to himself or herself, and to his own duty. But whoever simply dashes into this squanders and wastes a possession of tremendous spiritual value, which is often enough to raise him or her above other human beings and above his or her own destiny, a useful possession in comparison to which all treasures of the earth are mere junk. You know, this is an area I really need to focus on more, the fulfillment of the duty to the self. Is that your main focus, the Way to Live book?
Mark, I just got to say what you just said was like so profound. I'm like kind of puzzled by it, honestly, which is really strange.
Okay. Did you want to comment on it or
I'll say this, man, that the spiritual teaching that's why it's so important for us to study. I mean, the UFO stuff is interesting and all the history. I love that stuff.
Sure.
But the fundamental things of our life right now on this earth, to understand these principles and to grow in them and apply them to your life is critical. And I think that's where I love discussing this each week, because it just, brings it to mind and to work on things.
Fulfill your duty to yourself. Solon, you were going to say something. Go ahead.
I guess you can say I'm kind of speechless.
Okay.
I feel like if I add anything, it might not be as good enough as what you just said.
Okay. Well, here's a few of my notes that are straight word for word from the book. It says, no self-chastisement, no self-abuse, no feelings of inferiority, no bitterness. Be gentle to yourself. No flattery of the eye. Care for the health of your body and your psyche. Challenge your body and your mind. Don't devote yourself to your passions, your lust, your vices, your addictions. Use your intelligence, rational logic, or you will have no enjoyment in the fulfillment of your responsibility. I feel like there's a great wisdom there somewhere. Therefore, you must not oppress yourself through self-chastisement or self-abuse, or through self-disregard or bitterness, or through a feeling of inferiority, and so forth. Also, just as a depravity of one's own eye through flattery of any kind must never arise, self-neglect must never arise. And I think it's like a default feeling, sometimes the feeling of inferiority. I think a lot of humans have that, and I think it's programmed into us when we're very, very young to feel inferior, and it becomes part of our subconscious. So we constantly go back to sometimes a subconscious thought. And one interesting thing, and I wanted to discuss this with you guys, it's something I've been contemplating for a while. Actually, I probably have notes on this, but I'll go back to it in a sec. Basically, when you have a negative thought, it causes a negative feeling. And if you hold on to a negative thought, say it doesn't become any more negative, it's just still there, the feeling associated with the negative thought will become increasingly more negative. And then eventually, and I just think this is very interesting and significant the way Billy words this. He says, the feeling will transmit itself into the psyche, and where the psyche can eventually become disturbed and sick. I just thought it was so interesting that he used the word transmit. Did anyone else find that interesting? Go ahead.
I wish you had the German so we knew what type of transmit is it talking about.
Okay,
here.
I bet we can find it. It just takes a second here. But my browser is going crazy.
Like what is it, ringtone?
My browser is...
Oh, do you actually have the German with you?
Well, I have the book. Yeah, I can probably find it. Just take a second here.
Okay.
Bear with me.
All right. Well, with that, I want to read this last part while we wait. If you don't mind. All right. So this is also part of that. The make sure I say it correctly. The human being needs inner warmth, and it ends with this. It says, "Loving and positive attention towards babies, children, and young ones form themselves positively, and ensure that this is also carried into and maintained into one's maturity. So therefore, the whole thing persistently forms the consciousness-based and psyche-based development, which then also forms a healthy life-affirming and life conduct with a good world of thoughts and feelings. Already, as a baby, the human being feels how very important positive and loving words corresponding attention are. And this is then all the more the case in childhood, I should say, youth, and maturity. Thus, at the beginning of his or her existence in the material world, the human being feels whether or not he or she is met with inner warmth through loving attention, as well as feelings for him or her and affliction, etc. And actually, these values are the source of good and healthy life, and things for the human being as tendency important as the air he or she breathes, and as precious things. That's what it said. That's the good word there.
I think pets are kind of like that too. They seem to really need a lot of affection. I know when I let my cats in, sometimes they drive me up the wall and they just won't let me alone. It's just anyway, that's another discussion. And the same way with this other dog we have here. He's, oh my God, he wants so much attention. It's just unbelievable.
I also find this to be also true for human beings. I just don't think we share it in the same, we don't show it in the same manner sometimes.
The section that I was talking about, we're probably going to switch over to the other hour in about 4 minutes. But the section I was talking about is Might of Thoughts, page 68, and you'll have to do your plus or minus pages to find it in your version. It says this. It says, if the state is maintained further, then as a result of the continually negative thoughts, the feelings become correspondingly also increasingly negative and transmit themselves in this form to the psyche, which thereby becomes increasingly negative, increasingly unequalized, and finally disturbed and sick. And this is why I think there's so much addiction nowadays, is people don't know these. They don't know these tricks. They don't know how to break that vicious cycle of negative thoughts. And even after I had studied the Meyer material a long time, I still...
We're on break, Mark.
Okay. We're on break now. We've got about 5 minutes. I guess I can call Frosty real quick. Are you going to hang around so long?
Yeah.
Okay, good. Good. This will be great. Let me give Frosty a call. Please talk, you guys, if you can. It's kind of noisy, too. So I'll be right back.
How's it going, Steve?
I think we're on the air right now, bud.
Oh, we're not allowed to talk. Oh, I thought you said we could talk, so I just wanted to see how you were.
I'm doing good, bud.
Awesome. How's the weather there in Michigan?
It's doing a lot better today. It's a little bit warmer, and I think we're going to get a little mix tomorrow, a little snow or rain. So, it feels good to have a little heat.
Yeah, I actually just did some spring planting, so I feel like spring's coming very, very soon. Of course, we are about to go through the time change.
It's been a long winter up here. No,
I bet. I've heard some amazing records around that area. I actually heard about the Great Lakes freezing at one point.
Oh, really? Yeah. I'm not sure about that. I know a lot of ice fishermen are out there, but it was definitely cold enough for it this year.
Yeah.
Well, I did get in touch with Frosty. So, speaking of cold, Hopefully we can still have all of us talk. If I go quiet, I got pushed off. So you guys have to... You guys might get to interview Frosty. Let's see what happens here. So we are calling.
Mark, I'm going to go on mute and then tell you when that show starts back up.
Okay.
Frosty speaking.
Frosty, can you hear me?
I can hear you loud and clear.
Okay.
Great to hear you, Mark.
It's good to hear you, Frosty. We're on break. We got about another minute or two.
Okay.
All righty.
And you will catch a Fenton perspective with our great host, Lori and Fenton. Come listen in as she shares her amazing stories.
Mark, I'm going to go on mute and then tell you when the show starts back up.
Secrets to the future. That's the Fenton perspective every Monday evening right here from 8 to 10 p.m. Eastern Time.
Okay,
only.
It's good to hear you, Frosty. We're on break.
Radio.
We got about another minute or two.
Oh, and
Okay.
All right.
you don't need to expect us. We're already here.
Who are we? Where do we come from? Are you curious about the origins of the human race? Join me, Gavin McCall, and a variety of guests on Ancient Humans, where we decipher world events, explore scientific theories, personal stories, myths, mysteries, and lore about the history of the human race.
Hi everybody, it's me, the Fedge, host of Inside the Eye Live. Before the Sunday mainstream media political pundit talk shows, there is Inside the Eye Live, where we break down some of the weekly mainstream media talking points before the talking points even get aired. Add in some entertaining stories, weather, cats, intriguing and informative guests, and you get one of the most listened to Saturday morning streaming media political talk shows going today. And it's all right here on our flagship station, Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com. So join me, the Fetch, for Inside the Eye Live every Saturday morning at 10 o'clock a.m. Eastern. It is truly intelligent media for the politically aware.
How healthy are your arteries? Deteriorating circulation has a number of early warning signs. High cholesterol, high blood pressure, fingers and or toes often go cold, arms and or legs often go to sleep, sharp diagonal crease in the earlobe, short walks cause cramping or pains in legs. Memory is not as good as it used to be, ankles swell late in the day, chest pain after physical exercise or emotional stress. If you experience even one of these symptoms, your circulatory system is crying out for attention. Extendivite is a natural solution to help improve your overall health. Extendivite is not your average heart tonic. To order, call 1-877-928-8822 or visit heartdrop.com or find us on Amazon.
Extend your life with Extendivite.
The opinions expressed on this radio station, its programs, and its website by the hosts, guests, and call-in listeners or chatters are solely the opinions of the original source who expressed them. They do not necessarily represent the opinions of Revolution Radio and freedomslips.com, its staff, or affiliates. You're listening to Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com, 100% listener-supported radio, and now we return you to your host.
Hello, everyone. I'd like to welcome all of you back to the second hour of Ohio Exopolitics. I'm your host, Mark Snyder. We've got Frosty Wooldridge today as a guest. We've got Solon also and Steven also riding shotgun here. Frosty, the first hour of the show, one of the interesting topics we got on is indifference. There seems to be a growing indifference among people. Have you noticed any of that? An indifference generally towards one another, towards everything. It's just strange.
Well, it is exactly that. And one of the points that was made in the latest book that I just finished reading, and any of you can go to CapitolHillOutsider.com to see the 7-part series on the strange death of Europe, identity, immigration, and Islam. And as you all know, Europe right now is being invaded, has been invaded by, at this point, around 50 million Middle Eastern people and certainly Africans. And the invasion is not slowing down. If anybody has read my 5-part series, The Deadliest Birth Rate for All Humanity, and you can look it up on Capitol Hill Outsider also, and or you can go several other, freedomsphoenix.com, certainly newswithviews.com. But just look it up on the internet and you'll see it, The Deadliest Birth Rate for All Humanity. And what's happening is, of course, and I've discussed it before, Africa at 1.1 billion people is going to hit 2 billion by 2050, which is 31 years from now. India is going to go from 1.25 billion to 1.55 billion. And China is still growing, even with one child per family, and will grow from 1.42 billion to 1.5 billion within the next 30 years. So as you can imagine, the consequences of mass migration to Europe and Canada and America are not going to stop unless these countries themselves stop that massive impouring of people by simply shutting down the borders. And one of the things in the book, The Strange Death of Europe by Douglas Murray, and I've got it right here, and it's really quite frightening. I've actually, out of about 360 pages, I've dog-eared about 50 of the pages as I wrote the report on that. It's called Civilizational Despair. One of the things that's happened to the United States, and I hope this rings true for every person listening, is the fact that there's so many of us. In fact, Isaac Asimov said, the great science fiction writer, said that overpopulation will be the destruction of our democracy. It's because people's votes don't make any difference anymore. Individuals don't make any difference anymore because why? There's so many. I can tell you that from firsthand knowledge after having traveled all through Asia. People are just sitting on the streets, living in utter poverty. As I told you, 60% don't have a toilet. There in India. The consequences of overpopulation in China, India, Bangladesh are so overwhelmingly beyond the capacity for anybody to not only do anything about them, but then at some point not even care. Civilizational despair, if you will. And so here in America, nowadays, we've got 330 million people. When I was a kid, back in college, we only had 194 million. And everybody was American. Well, we're closing in on 50 million foreign-born in this country right now. And so 50 million people in this country right now weren't even born here. They have really no stake in this country. They don't even know who Thomas Jefferson was. They certainly could care less who Abigail Adams was. They don't even know the guy named Abraham Lincoln or George Washington or Thomas Jefferson, right on down the line. And so what you're seeing is just, and you could, I think it was Jay Leno, and there's another guy on Facebook that goes around asking people out in California, who was Thomas Jefferson, or who is he? And nobody knows. And how many states in the Union? They don't even know. They can't even name the 2 senators from their own state. They can't even name the capital of their own state. And so for those of you who don't know this, there are about 45 million people in this country who are functionally illiterate. Functionally illiterate. What is that? About 1/7 of our population. So when you see that people are indifferent, or they simply don't care, it's because they're clueless, if you will, or they have no interest. They don't have a dog in the fight, if you will, as to this country. When I was in college, you had to go into the military after you got out of college. You're going to go into the military, period. Well, nobody has to go into the military anymore, and less than 1%. And I know one thing about the military. When I was in the United States Army as an Army officer, you respect the flag, and you respect the Pledge of Allegiance, and you respect the United States of America because you put your heart and mind and soul into it when you were in the military, and that's the 5 branches of the service. That we all know, or at least all of us who care know. And so one of the things I've found, certainly in the last 50 years, is that you got your Generation X, you got your millennials and all that, and they have no investment. They're living off the incredible sacrifices by the World War II veterans. They're certainly living off the sacrifices of every person that's been a military person, from the Korean War through the Vietnam War, through the Afghan War, through the Iraq War. And virtually 99% of Americans have no investment whatsoever. So if you have no investment and you take your freedom for granted, and you take food for granted, you take housing for granted, and you take a job for granted, or the fact that you don't even have a job, and you're living off, food stamps, EBT cards, Section 8 housing, then what's the point of being involved? And again, 50% of Americans don't vote in national elections, and 90% don't vote in local elections. So I can say this, Mark, when you say that there's a lot of indifferent people, you would be very correct. And so many of them simply don't care because it's just not in their consciousness, because they don't have a dog in the fight.
There is a lot of commentators now on the left. And personally, I think in the mainstream media, a lot of these people on the left, I know they're paid officially by like CNN, but I think China is involved in this somehow, and we can talk about that a little bit. But Don Lemon is one of them that's said a lot of strange things about, white men being a terror threat and things like that. Can you comment on that?
Yes, I actually wrote about that. It totally a racist, an extraordinarily racist comment for a man like Don Lemon. He's a gay black man, from what I understand, much like Jesse Smollett.
Yeah.
Yeah, and Don Lemon also has a position because of his minority status that's given high ranking there at CNN. And again, it would be okay if he was as responsible as Lester Holt. I would like you to all know, every person listening, I respect Lester Holt. Mm-hmm. This is a newsman. This is a journalist. This is a reporter who gives you the facts. And that, to me, is what is needed. We don't need somebody like a Don Lemon using his blackness, if you will, to push an agenda, to create more racial strife, to create more racial discontent, to create more racism. Because anytime you make a statement like that, and I would also extend that to a guy like LeBron James, who is also a racist. I mean, he is an absolute racist. He knows it. He's said it. He doesn't like white people, and I've reported on him also, and I've listened to the videotapes of him telling how he doesn't like white people. And the reality is, this country is a majority of white people. And the white people of this country really are the ones that built up and created the U.S. Constitution. It wasn't anybody else. It was a bunch of white people. And yet, all those white people are the reason all of the other people, black, brown, yellow, and otherwise, have the extraordinary ability to succeed in this country because they have the rights to jobs, they have the rights to athletic careers, they have the rights to comic careers, to television careers, movie careers, Denzel Washington. I can go right on down the line. All of these blacks and certainly whites and browns and yellow persons in this country have the most extraordinary opportunity to be very self-expressive, be very creative. Spike Lee, who hates America himself, is a filmmaker, and he's very racist himself. What an opportunity he has over here. Whereas if he was in Africa, where he originally his descendants were from, he wouldn't have anything like that. Go to Africa, and you won't see any black people being NBA stars or baseball stars or Major League Baseball, or anything, NFL stars, NBA stars, even hockey. There are black people in hockey. There's black people in just about every sport in this country, and they can if they want to. But you won't see any stars over there, but the only stars you see in Africa are the Kenyans who win the Boston Marathon every year because they're so fast and they're so endurance-oriented. So that's the tragedy of a Don Lemon. He's living in a country that gives him the most extraordinary opportunities, and same with LeBron James, and he has the least amount of appreciation, and yet he wants to cause up as much racial strife and trouble, either to make his ratings better or whatever it is, but it's not doing anything good for this country, certainly not for the racial relations in our country. And I would also extend that to Oprah Winfrey. She's had some pretty racist comments over the past, and yet she is the one who's benefited from the white race and certainly enjoyed the extraordinary freedoms that she has here, whereas if she was back in Sudan or Congo, she would probably be a multiple rape person. She would have female genital mutilation in her life. She would be cheated just as low on the totem pole as you can imagine. So all of these people of color and all the people that are white in this country and all the people, period, in America, really should just be thankful to God in heaven or whomever they feel is the creator of the universe that they had such a lucky break to be born and or a citizen from immigration here in America.
I wonder, I think that there is a foreign government behind this. I think it might be China. China has bought a lot of Hollywood. It could be Saudi Arabia. But what I'm seeing is that conservative people from the right they're being banned from Twitter, YouTube, Facebook, just for expressing their points of view. Have you noticed this too, Frosty?
Yes, I've had it happen to me.
Oh, have you?
When I see, I was banned for 30 days one time. I was banned for a week twice now.
From Twitter?
And so, from Facebook.
Facebook, really? Now, what did you do?
I did was
just post something?
Well, there was a thing on Islam, and so I just pasted Voltaire's comments on Islam. I've got 20, and I've written a 22-part series on Islam in America. I wrote an 8-part series on impregnating America with Muslims, and I wrote a 12-part series on Muslims in America. And I just told the facts, the truth, kind of like the guy, Douglas Murray, who wrote the Strange Death of Europe. There was a comment on Islam, and I just simply quoted Voltaire's statement on what he thought about Islam. And, Voltaire was the French person he was a French philosopher. But I've got Teddy Roosevelt's quote on Islam. I've got about 20 different quotes on Islam that are just, they're stunning because they're by some of John Adams, in fact. I can go right on down the line, and all they did was just tell the truth. And so when I gave that Voltaire quote, they said it was hate speech, and so they banned me for 30 days, and then 2 other times for 7 days. They don't want any free speech there on Facebook, and they certainly don't want you to give the reality of what's going on in Islam. I could quote you right here. The militant Islam is the person who beheads the infidel, while the moderate Islam Muslim holds the feet of the victim for the radical one. Muslims must not take infidels as their friends, Quran 3:28. Terrorize and behead those who believe in the scriptures other than the Quran, Quran 8:12. I can give you about 100 passages like that. And so, that's what's going on. Facebook is absolutely doing whatever it wants to stifle free speech. No question about it.
Well, and couldn't a foreign government then influence our elections? Because if they go through and they're doing this, they've done it to Alex Jones, they've done it to a couple of other conservatives. What's the one fellow's name? I think he's a gay guy from New York. Anyway, but but they've done this to many of these conservative viewpoints. And what they're banning them from YouTube, they're banning them from Facebook. And so what they're doing is they have a bias, a huge bias against conservatism. So what they're doing is eliminating the conservative point of view from Facebook, from YouTube. And I think this could heavily influence the next election.
There's no question it could. Now, let me quote the Voltaire quote that on the Quran and Islam that I was banned for a month. Voltaire said, and I'm quoting, "The Quran teaches fear, hatred, contempt for others, murder as legitimate means for dissemination and preservation of this satanic doctrine. It talks ill of women, classifies people into classes, calls for blood and even more blood, yet that a camel trader sparks uproar in his tribe, and that he, Muhammad, wants to make his fellow citizens believe that he talked to the archangel Gabriel, that he boasted about being taken up into heaven and receiving a part of that indigestible book there, which can shake common sense on every page, that to gain respect for this work he covers his country with iron and fire, and he strangles fathers, drags away daughters, that he leaves the beaten a free choice between death and his faith. Now this is certainly something that no one can excuse unless he came as a Turk into the world, unless superstition has stifled any natural light of reason in him," unquote. That was Voltaire's statement on the Quran. I've got another 20 statements that are just about the same thing in different ways.
And two of the other guys I was thinking about, one of them was Gavin McInnes. I don't know if you've ever heard of him. And the other guy is Milo Yiannopoulos, who is actually on the left, but he has some conservative viewpoints. I mean, he's a gay man kind of on the left, not way left, but he has some conservative point of view. And he does give conservative point of views about things, but he's been banned as well. And he says that free speech is just totally being squashed. Anyone that comes up with any kind of information that's conservative now is getting banned off of these platforms.
That's exactly right. As a matter of fact, in the book, again, I'm holding it right here in my hand, Douglas Murray's Strangeness of Europe, Immigration, Identity, and Islam. The main powers and all the powers of all of the European countries and all the leaders absolutely banned any conversation against any of the mass immigration into Europe of Muslims. And now they are so overwhelmed with Muslims that there's nothing they can do. They have swallowed the camel, if you will, and they're being taken over. And there's no question. I just saw a video where this one Muslim in the Great Britain there, he says, "We are going to rule Great Britain before 2050. We're gonna rule it 31 years from now. The British will no longer be British. They're going to be Muslims, and they're not going to have much. They're not going to have any choice. And so that's the kind of thing that's going on. Look at what Omar up there in Minneapolis is doing right now. She's causing a complete, unbelievable brouhaha. But so is the Rashidi Tlaib there in Detroit. The same thing. So we've let these this unbelievable Trojan horse into our country, and now we're going to start paying for it. And you know, the one thing about the conservative view, I'm a person of conservative bent myself. I just call it common sense. Conservatives are using common sense. Highly democratic people are socialists. They are people that want to give away hard-earned money of workers who work to those who don't work, or don't want to work, or won't go to school, or won't stay in school, or won't become personally accountable. There was a lady out in California who was African American. She had 4 kids, and she was living in a very nice apartment, and she was bragging about her EBT card and her Section 8 housing and her 4 kids, and she gets to go to Subways and McDonald's, and her EBT card works for her so she can treat the kids all she wants to pizzas, which of course is not a very good food to eat for any kind of solid nutrition. And then at the end of the interview, she says, "I just don't know why anybody would want to work in America."
Wow.
That's how stupid she was. I mean, that's how stupid she was. And yet that's true for 44 million Americans who are living on food stamps or subsisting on food stamps or whatever they're doing. They have no personal accountability. They didn't stay in school. They didn't earn a degree, a high school diploma. They certainly didn't go on to vocational tech. And so we see more and more of that coming down. What happens when it was during Obama? He put 13 million more people on the food stamp rolls. It went up to 48 million, and now it's down to 44 million, and hopefully dropping more. But what happens when you get 50 million? What happens when you get 100 million people on food stamps? That's what socialism's all about. At some point, socialism kills the ability of an individual to have personal accountability and personal responsibility. And so at some point, there's no way that can continue because it simply will collapse in the end, and that's kind of where we're headed.
Solon, Stephen, you guys have any comments, thoughts?
Yeah.
Okay, good.
I actually have a comment about your last statement. And I think this goes back to overpopulation. But if we were to, and I'm not saying, well, if we were to get to a stable population and maintain it, do you think socialism could work then?
Well, socialism can work if you have enough people pulling the financial workload, if you will, in order for those who are unable to do that. And we already have enough socialism in this country. We do have millions of Section 8 housing where people are given free housing. We also have millions and millions on free energy because we pay more for them to have energy to warm their houses. We're paying for 44 million people on food stamps. We're paying Medicaid pays for all of those who are not unable to afford Medicaid. It's a poor man's hospital deal. And so we're already in a mess with socialism in this country, and it depends on how much deeper we want to go into it, Solon, that will cost us to a point where at some point that socialism will break down. And I guarantee you this, socialism will break down in Europe at some point because there's going to be more people on the wagon and not enough horses pulling the wagon so that at some point those horses break down, the system collapses.
Stephen, do you have anything?
Yeah, I think it goes back to, we often talk about the law of striving and how important that is for our development. And I think that's a key thing to do with this. But you also think of a smaller community. If, let's say you live in a small community and you have a person that is in need, maybe they're injured or sick, the people are aware of it and they'll help that person out. But if they feel like that person is well now and they're not contributing, they're not working, they're going to pull them off the teat, if you will, and they're not going to get that free assistance because they have knowledge of the person. Does that make sense?
It does make sense. In the end, you absolutely have to have a full community situation where there are enough people that are pulling that sled, that wagon, if you will, in order for the few, because it's the few that are in need of help.
Right.
It's the many who can pull the financial workload, and you can do that. I mean, Sweden was doing a very good job of it, and now they're starting to collapse because they simply don't have enough people. They've migrated. I think they've got something like 400,000 to 500,000 Somalis and Africans there in Sweden right now, and they're being overwhelmed. And they're about to collapse. Norway is about the same. They're coming close to 500,000 over there. The reason I know this is my brother lives over there for the last 35 years. And so at some point, nothing will save Norway, and nothing will save Sweden, and certainly Denmark, Finland, and Belgium the same way, and the UK. You can only have so many people on socialistic roles, essentially freeloaders. I mean, the ones that can ably work and don't work are freeloaders. But one of the really great tragedies for Sweden and Norway and all these you're bringing in these people from Africa who have no ability. They have no intellectual ability to learn and then engage a job. You can't. An African out of the bush in Somalia has a 68 IQ. That's the average in Africa. You can look it up.
Is that true?
I'm just making a statement. That's 68 IQ.
That's incredibly low, right?
Well, I know it's incredibly low. It's almost it's just barely. You can barely teach it basic. Basic. That's why the tragedy is that like in Minneapolis, Minnesota right now with 125,000 Somali refugees, the average IQ is 68. They have no more ability other than to drive a cab or sweep a floor. They can't be taught electrician. They can't become an electrician. They can't become a plumber. They can't become a teacher. They can't become a doctor. They can't. Literally, they can't do much of anything because the IQ again limits them. And you can look it up. Just look it up. Somalian IQ. And just look it up on the internet.
Do you know? Do they rate IQ in animals at all?
They can give you like a dog has a 10 IQ to a 20 IQ. A gerbil has about a 1 or 2 IQ. Yeah, okay. They rate certain animals with IQs. I think they rate dolphins are extremely smart, but I'm not sure what they equate a dolphin as far as IQ.
That would be interesting. It's probably pretty high compared.
Pretty smart, yeah. Dolphins are really, really smart.
I don't want to say anything, but I bet there are some dolphins that are.
They're probably smarter than humans.
I hate to say it. I didn't want to say that, but they're probably getting close. Do you think that we may have an immigration shutdown? I bet there is a fairly large amount of people. I could be wrong, but I think there's a lot of voices that aren't being heard, and I bet there are a lot of people in America that would like an immigration shutdown. What do you think?
Well, that's true. Millions. In fact, if you go to numbersusa.org, I'm looking at it right here. Average IQ of a Somalian is 68. Throughout Africa, the average IQ in Africa goes from I'm looking at all the countries in Africa, 65, and in sub-Saharan Africa, it goes from 65 to 75, and then you get to Northern Africa, it goes to 75 to 85. And then you go into the Muslim lands, and they have an average IQ of about 84. China has an average IQ of 105. Russia has an IQ of 100. The United States has an IQ of 98.
That's
98. Yeah. Well, we used to have 100 IQ in this country, but again, we've imported literally 100 million third world immigrants since 1965, and so the U.S. IQ has dropped to 98.
Isn't it in our
I'm looking right at it right here.
Isn't it in our best interest to help some of these other countries? I mean, help them in their own country. Don't bring them over here. Help them over in their country, right?
Well, it truly is. Help them in their own country. And again, you can go to, I'm looking at all these IQs. Equatorial Guinea is 59. St. Lucia is 62. Liberia is 67. Haiti is 67. One of the things here it is. Somalia, 68. Angola is 68. Ethiopia is 69. I'm going down through this. One of the reasons, and this is from my travels around the world, and I'm just, I'm a math science teacher, and I'm just going around the world, and I'm seeing all these failed societies on my bicycle. Mm-hmm. And they all say, well, it's not their fault. Well, it isn't their fault. It's their condition. And when you have a 68 IQ, there's no way that you can build the Empire State Building. There's no way you can build a bridge across the Mississippi River. If you have a 68 IQ, again, about the only thing you can do is sweep a broom or drive. You can drive a car. Not that I want to be in a car with somebody with 68 IQ. I'm not sure they'd be that alert. But that's the way it is. And the reality is Roy Beck says, and I hope all of you have gone to Roy Beck's numbersusa.org and even joined it. There's 9 million other Americans are saying we need to stop mass immigration into this country, and that is that places like the horrible, Japan, 105 IQ, South Korea's got 106, Singapore's got 108, Hong Kong's got 108. Italy, 102 IQ. So you see all the successful countries of the world have an IQ well over 100. and all the ones and they degrade further down the line, and they become failures as a state and as a country and as a civilization, as the IQs are lower. And so one of the Irishmen that was a great journalist who traveled all over Africa said that Africa, unfortunately, the cradle of all civilization for human beings, is an evolutionary disaster. Because the IQs of the Africans have remained somewhere between 65 and 80 at the most in northern Africa. And again, that goes in line with the fact that what do illiterate people do? They proliferate, sexually, and they propagate horrendously, and that's why Africa doesn't practice birth control, doesn't have any understanding of the consequences. And that's why they're going from the current 1.1 billion to 2 billion within 31 years at their current, prolific birth rates. And so that's what's coming. And nobody wants to deal with that, though. Nobody wants to talk about that. Nobody wants to talk about the IQs. But the IQs are what define a failed country, a failed continent. And then we all, in these first world countries with an average IQ of 100 at least, are being saddled with the mass immigration that's pouring into these countries that will continue to lower and degrade the standard of living and the quality of life, not only overwhelmed by the sheer numbers, but the fact that these immigrants don't have the ability to work in a first world country and economy. They just can't do it. They don't have the horsepower.
If I was an extraterrestrial and I came here in a ship with a bunch of other people from another world or something, and I came to the Earth, and I saw all these different cultures at totally different levels of development, I would almost think that some of these people must have came here from somewhere. It's just very strange to me that we have this kind of difference in our evolution. You'd think that people would evolve at about the same rate, but it seems to be drastically different here on the Earth. Isn't that bizarre?
Well, it is bizarre, but also understand that those who migrated out of Africa had to have the Lucy man, and then you've got the Neanderthals, and then you had the other ones that finally died out. But the human primates, the ones that stayed in Africa, they didn't have any other need. They could hunt and gather, and so their brains didn't have to grow. Whereas the ones that went north had to grow and learn how to use fire, then had to learn how to clothe themselves, which they didn't have to do in Africa. And then they had to think about how to feed themselves, and then they had to think about how to use fire more methodically, and then they had to make tools, and then they started making tools, and as they did, they started growing their cerebral cortex. And as they grew that cerebral cortex, and then they learned, and then they passed down that learning, and then they monkeys don't talk. Well, the monkeys in Europe started talking. The primates that evolved into the Neanderthals, they start, and then you can go on to. There's quite a few historical films out showing how humans advanced, but once we created the language, and then we started thinking, and we had that opposable thumb, and then we created the tools, and I got to see it when I was at the Oracle of Delphi in Greece. I bicycled up to the Oracle of Delphi, and I got to see the museum there for 3 days. I was so fascinated. I paid 3 days worth of going into that museum, and you can see the Stone Age, and then you can see the Bronze Age. The Stone Age, and then the Bronze Age, and you can see increment by increment by increment, hundreds and thousands of years of the human drama. You can see all of a sudden they've got these beautiful statues made out of bronze. And then they've carved all these things, and then you get to a Michelangelo, and then you get to a Leonardo da Vinci or a Cernini or a Bernini or any of these exquisite, brains out there that their IQs were off the charts, and the savants, if you will, in engineering, and then the Wright brothers, and then we've already flown to the moon, for God's sakes. So it's amazing, but that wouldn't have happened if we all would have stayed on the continent of Africa. We'd all be pretty much 68 IQs if we'd have stayed there, because we wouldn't have the need. There would have been no need to advance ourselves.
I have heard this argument before, and it's interesting. So if you follow that line of reasoning, people of color started out in Africa, and then they moved into Europe and Switzerland, and they had to use their mind, and their skin started to change. It became
right. They just weren't
more
cooked under the sun anymore.
Right.
Yeah, they were clothed, they were covered, and so they evolved into whiter skin simply because it wasn't needed to be in the dark skin anymore.
So, assuming that we don't destroy ourselves, and say we survive another 5,000 or 10,000 years, and there's still a civilization in the U.S., would you think all people then would slowly evolve into white skin?
More than likely not now. All these different evolutionary situations, some will blend, some will die out. Here's the one thing that I can state, and I have studied it as my book it comes out in the fall, is that we're going to run out of oil. And folks, the slave of oil is the most prolific and usable energy slave on the planet, but it is about to run out in the next 30 to 40 years. I mean, some of the best they're saying is maybe 2075 it will all be gone, but by 2050 it's going to be really hard to procure it. And of course we don't have any other energy sources to feed the tractors to pull the plows and the arable land, and we're about to add 3 billion more people. So we're in a lot of trouble as a human race. And so personally, some of the best prognosis is that you're going to see these massive cities are going to collapse, and mass starvation is going to take out literally millions, if not billions, of people. And the best case scenario will be the people that are out that are more or less pioneers. They can have a water source and a ground source and a planting source, and the ability to maintain themselves will live in these different enclaves around the planet. So you'll still see the different colors and the different varieties and the different languages. It's just that there will be a whole lot less of us.
I was just thinking that since evolution kind of took us from, if you follow the logic, that evolution took us from having dark skin in Africa, and then we moved to other areas where maybe there was less heat, less light, and then we developed white skin. It just kind of seemed logical to me that over a great time period that we would see the same kind of evolution again. But I don't know. I'm just totally speculating. But in terms of the future, I think is a very interesting thing to look forward at. If we're going to collapse, which it looks like we are, I mean, we cannot continue with 99 million barrels of oil per day. In fact, it's going to be more, right? It's going to be from China.
It's going to be 200 million a day. 200 million within 11 years.
So
that's how fast we're going.
So we're seeing the homeless now form in the cities around the United States, and we're seeing the diseases starting to break out now, right?
Yep, we sure are.
For example, typhus. Isn't typhus one of these diseases that they thought was eradicated, but it's actually coming back, and like in Los Angeles?
That's correct.
And
typhus.
Can you tell us a little bit about that? What tell us about this? I mean, because we're going to see, is this nature's way of reducing our population?
Oh, of course it is. Anytime a species overruns its carrying capacity, it's called the tragedy of the commons. You can look it up. Go to the Garrett Hardin Society.org. Garret Hardin Hardin Society.org. Garrett Hardin Society.org, or just look up the tragedy of the commons. It's one of the most brilliant biological understandings of what's going on. And right now we are in the tragedy of the commons here in the United States, certainly all of Europe, all of Canada, certainly all of Russia, certainly all of Africa, and boy, oh boy, China, a tragedy of the commons in China and India, and Bangladesh, probably the worst example of the tragedy of the commons. And so typhus, another disease, and you have to, the vectors, disease vectors are the carriers. And so a vector, if you have a group of people who are untidy, unclean, unsanitary, they are defecating in their front yard, and that's what's, go to the outskirts of Mexico City, and you'll see literally 1 million, I think somewhere over 1 million people living in cardboard shacks, defecating with the chickens in the morning. And of course, you all know, as I've said, 60% of Indians over there in the subcontinent of India do not have a toilet, so they're defecating with the chickens also and urinating. And so you have all of these diseases, and the vectors are the unsanitary aspects of what's going on. And so as we have more and more of the 90,000 people that are living in these TARP cities, like in Los Angeles, you've got all these disease vectors. And typhus, it can just spread like wildfire. Cholera, the same thing. And so... and you got, again, 11,000 homeless right there in San Francisco, and 6,000 there in Seattle, 10,000 here in Denver, Colorado, where I live. And so what do you do? Well, what's going to happen is you're going to see, and again, in places like India, where there's so much unsanitary living, you're going to see a tremendous amount of diseases spreading from hamlet to hamlet, because they're infectious, they're viral, and you're in close contact. In places like India, people live with their chickens. Well, there's Hansen's disease, which kills chickens by just unbelievable rates of speed, and then you've got all of the other contact diseases that are, and then the more you pack them in, overpopulation wise, you then have the spreading of those diseases. So we're really facing a tremendous amount of consequences on so many levels.
I'm reading here. It says typhus causes inflamed blood vessels, which in turn cause a dramatic drop in blood pressure, as well as internal bleeding. Patients.
Yeah, they'll bleed right through their noses. Yeah.
Oh, really? Ugh.
Oh, yeah. You bleed through the nose. You bleed right into the inner body. Oh, yeah. Typhus is nothing to mess with.
And patients...
I was a medical service corps officer in the United States Army, and I remember in all of my medical training, what we had to do to go out into the field, and what were the first things we had to do to make sure that the troop was not going to come down with infection, et cetera. And boy, the bugs out there, they're ready to take us over at any time. All these bacterium, certainly these viruses, they will just scourge, if you will, the land and the people that are on the land and the animals when they're in such tight compact.
Typhus can also cause kidney failure, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep, sure can.
So will it go away on its own, or do you have to use antibiotics or something like that?
Antibiotics, right.
Mm-hmm.
You have to.
Mm-hmm. Yep. So is that the historical trend we're going to see as the...
Oh, yeah, we're going to... Yeah.
Well, I guess what I'm seeing is the oil is going to deplete. The populations are going to continue to increase. We're going to see people being homeless, especially in the cities. Then you're going to see these diseases start to break out, right? And the diseases are probably going to kill a lot of the people, the homeless people, and kill the people in the cities, correct?
Well, that's correct. Let me just give you an example. Cholera. Cholera is an acute diarrheal illness caused by infection of the intestine with toxigenic bacterium, and the name of it is cholera, vibrio cholera. Mm-hmm. It estimates about 2.9 million cases around the world and 95,000 deaths every year. So you get a cholera outbreak there among those 90,000 in Los Angeles. Now, look at this. Every person listening to this broadcast today, if we could solve the 90,000 homeless there in Los Angeles, don't you think we would do it?
Mm.
What about the 11,000 right there in, instead we're over there fighting in Afghanistan and Iraq for the last 18 years, and we've spent $5.9 trillion. Do you think that the leaders of this country are making common sense, rational, logical decisions up there in Washington, D.C. on how to spend our money when we're having our own country rot from within, both infrastructure-wise? Does anybody look it up? Go to Google or go to the Internet and look up how many water mains break in this country every day. Just look it up. How many water mains? Why are thousands of water mains breaking in all these cities? Well, New York City is sitting on water mains that were built back in 1901.
Wow.
Same thing here in Denver. We have water mains breaking all the time. Los Angeles, the same. We're not taking care of the infrastructure in our country. We're not taking care of the 45 million people who are completely illiterate. We're not taking care of the cancer that's spreading across this country because we can't. But what are we doing? We're feeding people, McDonald's and Wendy's and pizza, and nobody understands what it is to eat a healthy, nutritional consumption. And so you sit here and you see a country with 7 out of 10 people are obese and or overweight, and we've got cancer spreading and heart attacks, killing 1 million people a year. I think it's about 900,000, but there's 1.4 million heart attacks every year. In fact, one of my friends who was just turned 68 this fall had a heart attack 4 days ago, and they put 2 stents in him.
Wow.
And you go, holy catfish. Ken Hoyne, my friend, he's in Florida now. But anyway, that's what's coming. And if we're not being able to stop it right now, and yet we're importing 1.7 million immigrants every year, and most of those immigrants are people from third world countries, does anybody listening, do you think we're going to survive this? I would ask you that question. Is there any chance we can survive another 100 million immigrants, 110 million immigrants that are going to be added to this country in the next 31 years? And I think you all know the answer. I mean, Mark, you know the answer. I know the answer. Solon, you know the answer. Stephen, you know the answer. I mean, we are screwing ourselves down a path that there's irreversible and unsolvable, because once the 110 million more land on our shores, we're done. I mean, there's no way to cope with it.
Right now, I'm reading here that there are 50,000 homeless people in Los Angeles and about 12,000 in Seattle. Do you have any more statistics on that?
Okay, my latest figures were 6,000 in Seattle, and I was just there this last summer. And 11,000 was the official report for San Francisco, and it was somewhere between 80 and 90,000. Now, I can tell you, I rode my bicycle through all this. I've got pictures. And you sit there, and when you go through it, and you smell it, and you see it, I would say, whatever, you just got the figures of 50,000. Okay, so 50,000 or 90,000. Okay, there's a difference of 40,000 there, but 50,000. Let's just take a baseline of 50,000. Why hasn't that been solved? Well, it's because right now California is adding 1,655 people every single day, net gain. 98% of them are legal and illegal immigrants from the third world. And so California really could very well become our first failed state, and it could collapse because there is an incredible outmigration of white people leaving California, because California is turning way brown, and even black people are leaving Southern California because Mexicans can't stand blacks, and the Mexicans are running the blacks right out of Los Angeles. That's a fact. Some of my best friends who are black, the former Terry Anderson, just said, we're just being completely overwhelmed by Mexicans, and they don't like black people. And he was one of my dear friends. Yeah.
That's amazing. So this is staggering. Now, these people that are homeless, they have no place to shower, no restroom? Do they?
No. Oh, no, heck no.
They defecate on the street? They're defecating
on the streets?
Oh,
yes, they do.
Unbelievable.
Everywhere. San Francisco is now turning into a third world hellhole, to tell you the truth, to match Los Angeles. And this 50 to 90,000 people are in a 50-block square.
50.
And there 50 blocks of Los Angeles where nobody wants to go, because I don't know how many of them are mentally deficient or mentally ill or mentally off or all the things that go with that. But it's probably half to three-quarters. I mean, these people are not able to function as human beings.
Wow.
Period.
50 blocks. That's like as big as Columbus almost.
Oh yeah. Well, I mean, there's 11 million people living in the Los Angeles basin there, so
that's unbelievable.
Yeah, 50 block square is no big deal.
So
yeah, if you all want to come to see a mess of overpopulation, just come to Los Angeles. I've been all over Los Angeles. It's a living nightmare every day. I don't know there's no way to solve it. They can't solve what's going on. The schools are just collapsed. There's no learning going on. There's 115 different languages out there.
Is Nancy Pelosi a representative for California?
That's right. She is right there in Los Angeles. Nancy Pelosi, a 78-year-old lady who's so old and so completely out of touch with reality. I mean, they ought to put her to pasture. She's so worthless as a representative in the House of Representatives.
So
she's leading.
We have 50 to 90,000 homeless people in L.A. They're taking up 50 blocks. They have typhus. They're dying of typhus. They're defecating in the streets. And yet she wants more immigration into
That's right,
California.
And she wants to give all these illegals the ability to vote. She calls them newcomers now. She wants all these newcomers. I really don't understand why the Democrats think that they can keep bringing in the newcomers, illegal aliens, and then get a whole new voting bloc to put them into power when we've already seen what happened to Chicago. Anybody seen Chicago lately? Anybody seen Los Angeles? Anybody seen what's happening and certainly there in San Francisco? That's where all the Democrats are in power. And that's where all the socialism is not working too well. You could say the same thing for New York City. It is getting to be a nightmare. And anybody, like I say, anybody listening to this program, I absolutely warrant you to go to Minneapolis and go to Somaliland, where Ilhan Omar was elected, and go into that Somaliland up there, and I guarantee you, it looks like Africa. Trash everywhere. Somalians will literally knock old people off their bicycles. They'll attack them in the streets. Nobody really white dares go into Somaliland up there. And the same thing in Detroit now with all the Muslims in Dearborn, over 300,000 of them. It's no longer Detroit. It's a foreign country. It's a little Baghdad. You go to Miami and you'll see thousands of Muslims bowing in the streets. And you'll see the same thing in Detroit. And it's because they are not part of America. And they never will be. They simply do not have the ability to integrate into a first world country with a 6th century religion because it bans them from doing that. That's what we're facing. We've screwed ourselves. That's what we've done as a country and as a civilization, as a culture.
We're running out of time. Do you want to plug your book?
Well, my one book, America on the Brink, The Next Added 100 Million Americans, really speaks to what we're facing. It's on Amazon. It will really sober you up. This new one coming out later this year will be America's Overpopulation Predicament, Blindsiding Future Generations. And everything that I talk about, I've seen personally, having traveled through all 50 states repeatedly in my lifetime, to see in the last 40 years, 50 years, the downgrade of America because of this massive infusion of third world people. We've just become a country that was so nice that we completely degraded ourselves and degenerated and devolved our society, so much so that it's no longer America with the American people and the American dream. It's loaded with, 45 million people who are not even born here, have no affinity to this country. And I'm going to bring that out in this next book. But again, the sheer numbers are the greatest tragedy that we're facing. And we'll keep talking about that each Saturday. And I hope there's a whole bunch of people listening. Because, again, I'd like to get on 60 Minutes on NPR. I'll debate with anybody, and they will not be able to deal with the questions and the facts that I raise, because the facts that I raise are not racist, they're not war, they're not fear-mongering, they're not xenophobic, they're not nativist. They're simply the facts, and we better start dealing with the facts because another 110 million people added to this country in 31 years is going to be a fact, and it's going to be a nightmare if we don't stop it.
Thanks, Frosty. That sounded like the music. Have a great week. We'll see you next week.
Thank you, Mark, Solon, Stephen, thank you.
Bye-bye.
Take care.